This lecture is meant to introduce you to Herodotus and his histories. We will be looking at significant portions of Herodotus's history, his researches, as he called them, through lessons or units 4 through 6. So we'll begin by noting the time frame that most scholars have pinpointed Herodotus as living. Herodotus is living at a time of great political upheaval, of great intellectual fermentation, and he is very much influenced by particularly the intellectual and literary trends that are then developing, particularly in Athens. Now, Herodotus was not native to Athens. Herodotus, as he makes clear, comes from a place called Halicarnassus, which, as you can see from the black arrow, is located along that strip of coastal Anatolia, which the Greeks referred to as Ionia. So Halicarnassus places Herodotus, when he's growing up, along the borderland between East and West. And this is going to be kind of a key feature of how Herodotus interprets events. And he is ideally placed to be as close as we can come to an impartial observer as he explores the contest, the conflict between East and West in the form of the Greco-Persian Wars. So I'll begin by just noting that there are 9 books within Herodotus's history, and a book would comprise primarily what we consider a chapter. Books back then were scrolls of papyrus. Whatever you can fit on one scroll of papyrus became known as a book. So there are 9 books, and as you can see from this brief outline, Herodotus, his history, his researches, his inquiries are wide-ranging, and they touch on a number of different cultures. I'll begin by just noting that Book 1 will outline the beginnings of the East-West conflict, and Herodotus does really conceptualize the Greco-Persian Wars as part of a broader conflict between the East, between Asia, and the West, between and Europe. And as you'll see in the readings for Unit 4, Herodotus believes that this long-standing situation was exacerbated from time to time by feuds. Initially, he points to the abduction of various women. We see first the Easterners abducting a quote-unquote Greek woman, and then the Greeks will respond, and it goes back and forth like this. Now, many of these characters, Io, Medea, these women that he mentions, are firmly rooted in myth, but Herodotus has made it clear that he does not want his history to be an extension of myth. He wants his history to be based on as close to the facts as possible. So he makes it clear from the very beginning when he's talking about these various abductions, and of course he includes Helen in this, the abduction of Helen from Sparta, brought back to Troy, Troy being representative of the East, Sparta of course is a Greek city-state, being representative of the West, and the Trojan War is launched as a response, as a Greek response to this abduction of a woman by the Trojans or the Easterners. So he opens up by taking a look at the abduction of women, in which he demythologizes these various stories to try to insert them as a kind of a historical fact. And then he moves through to Croesus, king of Lydia, who Herodotus describes as being the first Eastern monarch to do harm to the Greeks in general. And then he'll look at what happens to Croesus and the rise of Cyrus, who was the founder of what becomes known as the Persian Empire. So a lot going on in Book 1, and a lot of interesting stories that I'll get into a little later on in this lecture. Now, Book 2 focuses on Egypt. Book 2, lengthy ethnographic study of Egyptian civilization. Nominally, he's covering Egypt because Cyrus's son, Cambyses, will conquer Egypt and bring it into the expanding Persian Empire. Book 3, Cambyses' mysterious death, and how somebody not directly related to Cambyses will then assume the throne. And here is his Darius, who many believe was the greatest Persian emperor since Cyrus. Book 4 takes a look at Darius's campaigns against Scythia, which is now in southern, we would locate it in southern Russia, Libya, of course, to the west of what is Egypt. And Herodotus will use these discussions about military campaigns to analyze the different cultures of Scythia and Libya and pinpoint all their customs and how they are different from the Greeks. Book 5, we begin to get into the immediate causes of the Greco-Persian Wars, and this has to do with the Ionian Revolt. Ionia, you're well aware of, was that area of coastal Anatolia. That area had been Greek, but Croesus had conquered it, and then Croesus in turn had been conquered by Cyrus. And so Ionia goes from being Greek to being a Lydian holding to being a Persian satrapy, a Persian province. And of course, that is when the Ionians begin to revolt against Persian rule. That will trigger a broader conflict that will lead to two Persian attacks against Greece. Book 6, we get into the first military strike by the Persians against the Greek mainland, and this will culminate in 490 BCE with the epic Battle of Marathon, one of the historically one of the great underdog stories in all of military history. So we'll take a detailed look at that. Books 7 through 9 will focus on a second round of Persian invasions of Greece, this time led by the son of Darius, the great king Xerxes. So that's the overall structure of the 9 books. We won't be, of course, reading all of Herodotus, but we will be reading significant portions. So I want to give you guys an overview of what you may be missing and how to connect the dots. Okay, so on Herodotus as historian, first of all, we should recognize that historia means research or inquiry. Nowhere does myth appear in this particular definition, and this is the word that Herodotus used to describe his intellectual endeavor. And of course, as I've mentioned earlier, Herodotus is not content to rely on myth as an explanatory factor as to why events have occurred. He really does seek root causes through interviews and through his own analysis. The gods are very much left out of Herodotus' history, with the exception of the Delphic oracle, the oracle at Delphi, sacred to Apollo, where Greeks and non-Greeks, Croesus, for example, used to consult with the Delphic oracle to determine the future, if ever a matter of great importance was open for discussion. Oftentimes Greeks and again non-Greeks would go to Delphi to seek guidance. And of course the trick here is to understand and correctly interpret the prophecy that was given by the Pythia, the priestess there. And that was not always an easy task, and as we'll see, Croesus falls victim to some dramatic misinterpretation of what the Delphic oracle has related to him. Now, Herodotus is relying on what's called a 3-generation reachback, in which Herodotus, as a middle-aged man, can talk to a very older people who had, in their younger days, interacted with some people who had actually lived through the events that he is trying to describe factually. So we're looking at a 3-generation reachback, relying again on interviewing various people who would have known somebody who had taken part in the events. Now, one of the big things we should note right away, and you'll pick this up in your first set of readings in Unit 4, is that there is a very strong philosophical component to how Herodotus has structured his history. He never misses a teaching moment. He never misses an opportunity to instruct his readers or his listeners, initially before widespread literacy, Herodotus would read aloud in public performance his history. And there was always some sort of didactic moment where you could learn from other people's mistakes. And initially, this was a very, very strong and long enduring trend throughout the writing of history. That somehow history should be a type of philosophy that teaches by actual example, by actual historical event, what can we learn from other people's decisions and their mistakes. So that is present throughout the history. And I kind of did a copy paste of one of the pages you'll be looking at in the in your Herodotus text, and we see the what I've highlighted there with the black arrow is, and I'll quote Herodotus. He's talking about. I shall proceed with my history, which will be no less concerned with unimportant cities than with the great. For those that were formerly great are now diminished, while those which are now great were once small. So he's talking about this idea that the fortune of individuals, of cities, of empires is not immutable. Things change. There is a rising and falling tempo to events. And the black arrow below just points to that footnote, which James Romm, the editor of our Herodotus, has noted that this will be his single greatest theme, that of the divine balance governing both human and natural affairs. So, again, there's a lot of what are referred to as digressions in the histories, in which Herodotus seems to go off on a tangent and explore different cultures, different customs. He'll insert interesting stories throughout, but we must not lose sight of the fact that his primary goal is to describe the Greco-Persian Wars. And this becomes framed by a type of dichotomy, this idea that it is an East versus West struggle, and that there is a cultural incompatibility here that was bound to lead to conflict. And of course, it's no surprise that Herodotus, even though he's trying to minimize his bias, really does come down firmly with the idea that Greek freedom and all of Greek culture is far better than the Eastern monarchical type of despotism that is referenced when we look at particularly the three great kings of Persia, especially Xerxes. You know, the idea of monarchy as a form of government will actually be debated in what scholars believe is a debate that could not have taken place. But when Darius comes to the throne, there's a very interesting situation that Herodotus sets up, in which he discusses the various forms of government, democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy. And he has these major Persian nobles begin to discuss which one is best. And it'll be no surprise to see how the winner the winner of this debate actually and ironically points out the flaws of the type of government that he supports. All right, so I'm going to kind of leave that vague for you guys to read. It's one of your readings. Now, Book 1, as I mentioned, begins with the kingdom of Lydia. And of course, Lydia is located here in Anatolia, a very wealthy kingdom, and we'll see how Herodotus decides to take a very lengthy examination of the Lydian kings, because the last of the Lydian kings, Croesus, was the first Easterner to have done harm to the Greeks. I'm paraphrasing Herodotus here. So again, Herodotus wants to go back in time before the actual fighting between Greek and Persian takes place. He wants us to understand that there are deeply rooted causes for this East-West conflict, and so he chooses Croesus to begin his exploration of this tension between East and West. So we'll take a quick look at the opening sections of Book 1, in which Herodotus will explore not only the reign of Croesus, but he'll go back in time to explore a much earlier Lydian monarch. And again, this story is going to be an example of a kind of a philosophical lesson to be learned episode that peppers these episodes pepper the histories. And of course, I'm referring to the fall of the king Candaules and the rise of a new dynasty led by Gyges. Candaules, as a Lydian king, seems to have been the kind of guy that would really like to flaunt it if he had it, and of course he had everything that he could ask for. And Candaules gets into trouble, though, when, believing his wife is the most beautiful woman in all the world, he can't just let things be and boast about this verbally. He's got to have an eyewitness to confirm just how beautiful his wife is. And so one evening he asks his bodyguard Gyges to hide out in the bedchamber, the royal bedchamber, and when the queen came in to undress for bed, he would get kind of a real good look at just how beautiful the wife of Candaules is. And Gyges is horrified. He doesn't want anything to do with this. He thinks it's a bad idea, and he, basically tells Candaules, "Look, sire, I believe you. Your wife is beautiful. We don't have to take it to this level." But Candaules is insistent and kind of words his request with a vague threat. And so Gyges decides, all right, to avoid punishment, execution, torture, whatever, I'll hide out and have a sneak peek. And so he does. Now, the problem, though, is that the wife of Candaules, and of course she's never named, we never know her name, all she is referred to as the wife of Candaules, she sees Gyges sneaking a peek, and she says, "All right, that's how it's going to be." The next day, she calls Gyges into her chamber, and basically gives him two options: either he will be executed for his impertinence as to watching the queen as she disrobes, or she will kill. I'm sorry, Gyges will kill Candaules and marry her, and become the next king of Lydia. Now, given these options, it's no surprise Gyges said, rather than be executed, yeah, I'll kill Candaules, I'll marry you, and I'll become king. So he does. Now, there is a prophecy that says that affirms Gyges will be able to rule the Lydians, but within 5 generations, the house of Candaules will have its revenge. And of course, Croesus, the king we're about to start talking about, is the 5th generation after Gyges begins the new dynasty. So that again is this. There are a couple of teachable moments here. I won't go into all of them, but I will focus again on Candaules getting himself into trouble by being this kind of arrogant character who can't leave well enough alone. Has got to really flaunt his good fortune in the faces of all those around him. So he certainly gets punished for that. So now to Croesus, because again, after Gyges, we'll see 3 more generations. So we have Gyges and 3 other kings that I won't name here, and then we have Croesus, who is the 5th generation of the house of Gyges. And Croesus, unfortunately, is going to bear the brunt of a type of hereditary curse, and this is another theme. Mythically, yes, it appears, but the Greeks do believe that the sins of the fathers will be visited upon the sons. So by usurping power against the rightful king of the Lydians, Candaules being considered the rightful king, Gyges usurps power. His descendants will be able to enjoy it for a while, but there will be a price to pay. And Croesus is going to be, unfortunately, the victim of that curse. Now, one of the most interesting interactions between Easterner and Westerner actually occurs between Croesus And the Athenian sage, I guess we can call him a lawgiver, Solon, who you looked at in an earlier lecture. And although this could not have taken place, scholars believe there was no overlap between the two. This is another example of Herodotus creating a situation that could not have actually taken place historically, but Herodotus does this for his own reasons, and those reasons are philosophical. And I don't want to explore this in too much detail because it is one of your unit readings, but we have Solon visiting the kingdom of Croesus, and Croesus engages Solon in a discussion about who Solon believes is the happiest man in the world. The term used is olbios, the Greek term which means content and happy. And Solon gives him two responses in the form of first mentioning an Athenian named Tellus, and then two Argive brothers named Cleobus and Biton. And Solon uses these Greeks as examples of olbios. And nowhere in Solon's definition of olbios does wealth appear. And Croesus, at this point, is the wealthiest monarch in the world. Some of us old people still use a term richer than Croesus to indicate just how wealthy Croesus was. And of course, Croesus, when he's asking Solon about who is the most happiest, automatically factors in material wealth as being a defining feature of happiness. And Solon won't give him the satisfaction. Solon chooses to define happiness much more broadly, much more philosophically. And this again will stand as a contrast between Western values, Greek values, and Eastern values, in which the Easterners seem to be a little bit more superficial, a little bit more focused on tangible things, tangible wealth, to determine whether or not they're happy. So we have this debate and discussion, and I'll just conclude it by noting that Croesus is exasperated because Solon won't give him the satisfaction, and Solon basically says, look, dude, you are missing the point. You're still alive, okay? Human fortune is not immutable. You could very well lose everything tomorrow. So you can't count anyone as truly happy until they're dead. And the examples that Solon had given, Tellus the Athenian and Cleobus and Biton, had died after living very content lives. And Solon is making this point. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And Croesus fails to understand this. And basically, Solon is sent packing by Croesus. Politely, yes, but Croesus doesn't have any more use for Solon. Now, Croesus, sure enough, will experience epic downfall. And I won't go into the details of this, but more broadly, I want you to understand that, again, Herodotus is writing at a time where particularly Sophocles, the the Athenian tragedian, was very active. And we can note that in this story of Croesus, particularly his downfall, he goes from the pinnacle of wealth and power to, well, again, you'll find that out in the readings. And it's no surprise that this mimics the type of Greek tragic framework that Herodotus would be familiar with, because these tragedies are being performed in Athens, or at the time where Herodotus is living there. And it's important to note that Croesus himself is not necessarily a cruel despot or anything like that. Like he's got, whatever happens to him, he's got it coming to him. What Croesus suffers from is a flaw that often appears in Greek tragic heroes, what Aristotle refers to as hamartia. And this is an error in judgment, and where this error in judgment becomes most pronounced is in Croesus's interpretation of dreams and his interpretation of oracles. He does have a dream that he interprets, and he thinks that he can take measures to avoid the negative outcome of this dream. And I will give you a hint. It has to do with Croesus' son Attis. And of course, Attis would be the successor to Croesus, and Croesus wants to keep the boy alive and has a dream in which the boy's life is jeopardized. Croesus thinks he has his bases covered by putting in certain protective measures, but of course, no, you are a fool if you think you can outrun your fate. And Croesus finds this out the hard way. And then, of course, there is a moment where Croesus, feeling threatened by an expanding Persian Empire to his east, consults the oracle at Delphi, and the oracle tells Croesus basically, because Croesus wants to know, should I engage in conflict with this expanding empire? And the oracle says, if you cross the river Halys, which was the border between Lydia and the Persian-controlled territory, Croesus, if you cross this river Halys, you will destroy a great empire. And of course, if you're skeptical, you can read what actually will happen. But Croesus, again, chooses to focus on a positive interpretation of this oracle. The great empire would be the Persians, not his own. But of course, just the opposite will take place. So again, the idea here is that Herodotus is reminding us, and I think we could all use this reminder, that human fortune is not static. You'll have your good days, your bad days, your good years, your bad years, but you really can't sit content until after you've died and you've left behind a solid reputation as a good person, and that's something that Croesus doesn't see. So that will do this particular lecture, and just want you guys to do the reading. If there are any questions, get back to me and message me. But again, I'm pleased to introduce you to Herodotus and to Thucydides a little later on in this class, who I think oftentimes fall by the wayside in discussions of Greek civilization. So they will be front and center in this class, and I hope you enjoy reading Herodotus.